My name is Lisa Newberger, and I'll be moderating the panel today. I was very excited when Liz Ma asked me to moderate this panel. I've been involved with Net Impact since I was an MBA at Wharton, and have been involved with launching the San Francisco alumni chapter. So that's the context for me and Net Impact. I'm very excited about this panel, as we all are. We have great attendance here today. I think this topic of CSR reporting is extremely relevant to all of us. As industries mature, it becomes more and more important to prove the value of them. And I think we're seeing that with CSR now. We've seen this in business. As companies have been around for hundreds of years, they've developed sophisticated accounting systems. We're seeing this more and more in government, where governments are spending more time and effort to show the value of what they're doing and really reporting on it. We see this in the United States and around the world, and that's the area that I work in. And more now we're seeing with corporate social responsibility reporting that this industry or field is really maturing. And when the panelists, when we all spoke last week about the panel and we started to learn about everyone's rich experiences in this field from their companies, it became very clear that there's some kind of a life cycle of maturity of how companies are doing their reporting. And I think that you'll all hear this as the panel goes on today. And the format here, we have about an hour and 15 minutes, and we're going to start with introductions from the panelists, and then I'm going to pose some questions to them for another 30 minutes or so, and then I'm going to open it up to the rest of the room, and we look forward to hearing what's on your mind. For the introductions, I'd like each panelist to take approximately 5 minutes or so and to tell us three things. First of all, just tell us your title and the company that you're with. Second of all, tell us a little bit about your company's history with CSR reporting, kind of where you are in the life cycle. And third, tell us right now what your company's objective is with CSR reporting. What is the goal? Why are you doing reporting at this juncture? So those three things, and we'll start with Angela.
If I had known that, I would have moved down to the other end. I'm Angela Morrell. I am the creative director at the Coca-Cola Company in our leadership communications department. We publish all of the company reports, including the annual report, the citizenship report, the environmental report. We help with HIV/AIDS reports, specialty reports like that. We have actually been producing a corporate responsibility report for 4 years now, and I would say that every year it gets stronger. We started out in 2001 feeling like we needed to at least record some of these initiatives and programs from all over the world and all over the system, and put them in a book and put them on the website so people could really start to understand some of the involvement that we have in community. And we published a separate environmental report at that time to really talk about our performance within that aspect of our business. And I think where we are now is we really understand that we can't just talk about community. We can't just talk about environment in a vacuum without having this kind of wider look at our business holistically and thinking about the social, the economic, the financial, the community considerations. And as a company, we've actually explicitly said that we think that our company's growth will only be sustainable if we focus on planet and on people and on all of those other things, our products, our profits, that's really the only way we'll sustainably grow over time. And so I think for us, we're in this really interesting place where we're we're using reporting not just to be accountable, but to draw a line in the sand and say, okay, here are our targets and here are our goals, and just the act of putting them down actually makes us accountable to ourselves to meet those targets, but also to continually improve our performance. Environmentally, we've done this very well over the past few years. Our environmental report, as far as a global reporting initiative or an external standard type of system, our environmental report is really getting where we need it to be. We really focus on reporting about our environmental impacts. And with other impacts in the marketplace and in community, in the workplace, we're just now really thinking about what those targets and metrics should be. But we like reporting. I mean, we don't feel as if it's something we've got to do. We feel like it's something that we should do to improve ourselves and to let people at least have some kind of window into the company and how we conduct business. I mean, we've always believed in conducting business responsibly. It's not, I don't think that's my BlackBerry, but it's not just been in the past 4 years when we started writing reports that we've been conducting business in what we feel is an ethical and responsible way. But it's now that we understand that people need to know about it. It's always been kind of, you do these things because you're supposed to do these things. And you don't have to beat your own chest, and you don't have to tell everybody about it. That's not why you're doing it. Well, people want to know what you're doing. Consumers make choices, investors make decisions based on whether or not a company is responsible. So we see this as an opportunity to engage with folks like you, with stakeholders, and to really help you understand Coca-Cola and hopefully to get your input so that we can continue to improve.
Thank you, Angela. I'd like to turn to Kyle.
Hi there. I am Kyle Schott. I work at McDonald's in the corporate responsibility department there. Unlike at Coca-Cola, the corporate responsibility reports at McDonald's come out of our department, so they're not out of the communications area. In terms of our history of reporting, we published our first corporate responsibility report in 2002, and I actually brought a copy. I think the visual nature of it says a lot in terms of where we started and where we've come. So this was the first report that we did in 2002. And I think it was just, the objectives for this report, it was a chance for us to start kind of telling our story. However, when you read this, there wasn't really a materiality screen necessarily there. I don't think we talked at all about our supply chain in here. So there were some key things missing from it, but it was a first step for McDonald's in this world of reporting. The second report we published in 2004. So this is our most recent report. You'll see here, I don't know if you can tell, it's quite a bit thicker. We structured it a bit differently. For this report, I think we made some big steps. We aligned it with our business plan. We have our 5 Ps of our plan to win. I heard you using a lot of P words too. Yeah, we probably share these things. But so this report is focused around products, people, and place. And we really worked to align it better with our business. Instead of just being a document that told a story, we had some more metrics in here. We looked more at materiality. And then we've got a lot of content in here, a little bit too much, but this has been our most recent report. We're going to publish our third report in 2006. The objectives for this report, and this is actually similar with the previous reports, is we're really gearing this report to our internal audience. One of the benefits of being McDonald's is that it's a very large company, and if we can touch our internal audience, the 1.6 million people within our system, well, that's a pretty great start for touching the external audience. And we all interface with people in our lives and family and friends and stakeholders like this every day. So the key, I think, one objective for us is to touch our internal audience. The second objective is really just to tell our story. I think at McDonald's, we feel like McDonald's is a company that everybody thinks that they know, because you see it on your corner, you're very familiar with the arches, but a lot of people don't know what's behind. What is McDonald's doing about sustainable fishing? I mean, I don't think that we really talk about that, and the way that most of you hear about what McDonald's is doing, which is through our advertising. So this report is really a great platform for us to tell our story. And then a kind of third thing that we're doing as a step for this is that we're creating some key performance indicators. So for every report, the focus for McDonald's really in a lot of things that we do is based on continuous improvement. So how can we be better? And not just reporting to Angela's point to report, but really to kind of communicate the key messages that we have to say and what stakeholders want to know about. So.
Thank you. I'd like to turn it over to JC.
Hi, I'm JC Probalski from United Technologies Corporation. I want to start and just everyone knows Coca-Cola and McDonald's, but may not know United Technologies. And so UTC is a Fortune 50 diversified manufacturing company, and you probably know us much better by our brand names of Carrier Air Conditioners and Otis Elevators, Pratt Whitney Engines, and Sikorsky Helicopters, among other products. And so for UTC, corporate responsibility reporting is fairly new. I sit within the community affairs function at UTC and within the corporate entity. We published our first report last year, and it was very much designed to be sort of set a baseline for us. Our primary audience was all about our employees, and I have copies of the report up here for folks who want to take a look as well. And for us, it was really setting sort of a language and a baseline because as a very diversified corporation with 200,000 employees and various lines of business, and I would say different sort of business cultures between sort of an aerospace and commercial business, we wanted to sort of set a baseline. We wanted to communicate internally that corporate responsibility was important, but also this was the language we were going to use around it. This was the first time we had taken all of the elements, the social, the economic, and the environmental elements, and roll them into one document. UTC has been reporting on its environmental impacts for about 5 years in a variety of different formats, and so this again was the first time to bring it all together. As we move forward and we sort of take it to the next level, I think we're all sort of grappling with similar issues around developing metrics and creating standards, and so for us this year, as we publish our second report, we want to move beyond sort of just our employee audience and really be able to touch a variety of stakeholders and external folks as well. One of the other things that we're really focused on is taking sort of the metrics and the process behind our environmental management system and trying to replicate that across the social function as well, because in the spirit of trying to develop metrics and be able to report back year after year on metrics, which we're a company of engineers, we're a data-driven company, and so the data is very, very important to us. We want to sort of come up with that structure and be able to replicate it. And so what we're really looking to do is to set some objectives and come back year after year and be able to talk about the challenges, but also our progress towards delivering those goals. So that's a little bit about UTC.
Thank you, JC. Now I'd like to turn it over to Brad.
All right, thanks, Lisa. My name's Brad Sparks. I'm with KPMG, and I'm in a little bit different role than what my other panelists are on. Instead of working with KPMG's own CSR reporting, which we do, I'm actually in the external advisory space and help clients with doing their initial reports, helping them improve their reports, and helping them eventually, if they want to, get assurance on those reports. So it's a little bit different practice in that what we try to do is go in from a very business risk management perspective and help companies identify how can reporting actually help you and how can you make your reporting a little bit more robust, and also how can you get both internal assurance on this reporting and also, if you're interested, external assurance on it as well. What KPMG's done since 1993 is we've produced a survey like this. I left copies, some in the front. I've got a few copies up here. And it's looked at global companies and said, okay, what kind of trends in reporting do we find? And we've done this every 3 years since 1993, and our last one came out this past summer. So to put a few numbers around what Lisa was alluding to earlier about really the presence of reporting, what we found in this latest survey is of the global 250 companies, the top companies, 3 of those represented here, that 64% of these companies are producing reports related to this. The majority of those are standalone reports like the 3 companies represented up here have. But then another 12% of those are actually integrated with their annual reports, and that's an increasing trend that we've noticed too, which again, from a accounting firm's perspective, is pretty interesting to see when that's integrated with the actual annual financial report. A few other things we found is that in the U.S., we then looked at what the top 100 companies in the U.S. are doing, which is sometimes perceived to be a little bit behind the curve on reporting, and it's about 37% of the top 100 U.S. companies issue a report, and the majority of those being a separate standalone report as well. So we've got several other statistics I may bring out that are in here, but it's a really interesting study and really the most comprehensive study that we're aware of that really looks at the quantitative aspect of reporting, what companies are doing, and helps identify some of those trends in the reporting space.
Thank you, Brad. So to kick off the panel, I think we're all really interested in hearing what's working and what's not working, some kind of tips and techniques and challenges that you have to overcome on a daily basis. And I'd like to frame this along the lines of the general life cycle of CSR reporting in your companies. When we had our preliminary discussions, I heard you say, and I heard it again today, that one of the first things that you do with CSR reporting is to use that as an internal communications vehicle to really have a common language across your large companies. And then secondarily, you go outside and start reporting externally, and then perhaps starting with a standalone report, perhaps further on in an annual report, possibly. But if we start with the use of CSR as an internal communications tool, I'd like to have anybody here who has a point of view about how does using CSR help you as an internal communications tool? What works? What doesn't work? What kind of challenges have you faced there?
I actually think it's really interesting when you start talking about CSR reporting, or whatever you happen to call it within your company. People really think about corporate responsibility or citizenship or social responsibility as, at least internally at Coke, I think we have historically thought about it in terms of what are you doing for the community, or maybe what are you doing for the environment, but we haven't really thought about the fact that it should be a part of everything that we do, whether it's our supply chain or within our own workplace, our partnerships to create solutions around better water usage. I mean, it's so broad. And so I think for us internally, it's about educating people about corporate responsibility, and that it's part of the business, yes, but it isn't just about philanthropy. So I think people are really starting to understand that it touches the marketplace and the environment and all of those other things through the reports landing on their desks, and really seeing that it means talking about how we're creating jobs and economic benefits in South Africa, and it means water tanks in Vietnam with local communities. It's all kinds of things. So
I'd say that in terms of what's working in terms of our corporate responsibility reporting, communicating with our internal audience, we get a lot of positive. Well, I'd say first of all, if your key audience to start off with isn't your internal audience when you're producing your corporate responsibility report, I think you're really missing a great opportunity. Because when you get this knowledge into the hands of the people who really work in your company day to day, I mean, we hear all the kind of information about the benefits of, increasing employee morale and pride in the business and all of that, but also it's a great tool to kind of talk to the external audience. So we've gotten a lot of great feedback. People feel, increased pride. They really like seeing all these things that McDonald's is doing, but I'd say that the biggest challenge that we're facing, it's an opportunity, but it's a challenge in terms of reaching our audience. I talked about how we've got 1.6 million people. Well, those people are all over the world. They want to be communicated to in different ways. And so we're finding that, it's not a one-size-fits-all. This report we distributed it quite extensively internally. We printed 45,000 copies last year. The majority of those went internal, but it's a little bit daunting. I mean, you're not going to sit down and you're not going to read it cover to cover unless you really are interested in it, which we want everybody to be. But it's not only that; you just don't have the time to do that. So one of the things we've been doing to try to find out how to kind of deal with this challenge is we've been holding some focus groups with our restaurant managers. And we have our hamburger university at our corporate headquarters where our employees come out and do training sessions. So we've been doing some focus groups to find out, do you know about this information that McDonald's is doing, and do you want to know about it? And if so, how can we talk to you about it? We're finding that people don't really know that much about it. To Angela's point, we have Ronald McDonald House Charities, which is what McDonald's really connects with. And it's actually a great leveraging point to say, this is what you all know about, but did you know what else we do? So it's kind of the first stepping stone to communicating with our internal audience. And for this next report, I think we're really looking at, in addition to this report, how else are we going to be able to communicate with our key internal audiences? Because the report only has legs that go so far. So I think we're really trying to kind of broaden our thinking around that. And although we're still producing 45,000 copies of the next report, I think we're hoping to do other brochures and really focus on our website. But, another challenge to go along with that is we're looking at right now the translation of languages, because our key audience for this report is our big 9 markets. And even within those markets, I think there's like 6 or 7 languages. So you're talking about translating and printing reports. A lot of companies deal with this. I think I was talking to British American Tobacco last week, and they were saying they have 32 local reports. But anyway, so most of that comes out of our department, so it's quite a challenge for us, but one we're hoping to kind of take steps towards tackling at this reporting session.
We've done a couple things with the publication of this report, which I think are interesting. I mean, in much the same way people traditionally looked at, or when you talked about corporate responsibility, it was sort of community affairs, it was community philanthropy. And UTC doesn't have a separate foundation, so it was sort of all about what we were doing in a particular location. When we published this document, we actually did our first sort of webcast for our employees all over the world, so that they could hear the chairman talk about it, which for us was a big deal, and we were very pleased to have so many people take advantage of it. One of the other things that we've done is sort of speak to select groups of employees as they get together. So as our environment, health, and safety staff gets together across the globe, or our business practices organization gets together, we've been presenting the report and sort of talking about it. We've also used some of the images in the report. We used a lot of employee photographs, and this is a great photo of an employee actually in India, one of our Otis employees, and it's about a safety program that we launched in India and that Otis has taken to a variety of other locations. And so we used some of these really graphic images, and it was really great to see not just the Otis business unit, but Pratt & Whitney and Carrier launching safety campaigns about not about corporate responsibility, but about the importance of safety, but sort of everyone picking up on corporate responsibility and being proud of the fact that we've published this document and utilizing it in a variety of different functions, which I think is great. We have a new vice president of business practices who runs our global business practices and sort of business ethics organization, and he came from one of the business units. He's a lawyer by training, and when he came into this position at corporate as the VP of business practices, he said, I was just always doing my job. I thought this was part of the way that we do business, but now I realize that corporate responsibility is my business. As the head of business practices and as the head of this organization that looks at ethical issues across the corporation, I am corporate responsibility. And so I think that sort of spirit, when you publish a document like this and it resonates with people, it goes a long way. And they're not only happy to sort of talk about the issues, but they also want to be able to share what they're doing and their challenges as well, and to see what comes next. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll make one comment about internal reporting as well, and to employees. One of the things that we found, again with our survey, is really one of the top countries that's done this is Japan, with about 90% of their top 100 companies issuing standalone reports. We were at Colin, JC, and I were at the BSR conference last week in D.C., and I attended a panel that was on CSR reporting. They had the woman from Sony came up and talked about a little bit about their reporting process. And one of the things that she said that her group had done is that they looked at who requested reports and just did a match of the number of people and the types of people that were requesting a copy of their report, and they found that about 60% of all their reports were going out to their own employees. So it shows where really the level of interest was being from a, wanting to be an employer of choice, communicating that to employees, and they hadn't been proactively sending it out to their own employees, but employees were wanting it. So I thought that was a pretty interesting stat on who actually reads these reports.
Thank you. So my next and final question for this part of the panel is about external reporting. And I'm really curious how you decide what to report to external audiences, if it's at all different from what you're focusing on for internal audiences, and really how do you ensure that the CSR report going externally is really a meaningful report and not merely a PR tool? And anyone can jump in. We don't have to start with Angela.
Well, I'll start on this side. How's that? So I think that's definitely the number one challenge of any clients that we work with is figuring out, one, what to report. And going in within that is kind of, there's the difference between what can they report versus what should they report. So the data collection for some of this stuff is very, very difficult. And once that's not, until that really gets integrated in the company's internal reporting system, even though this may be a key indicator that their stakeholders want to hear about, the company may not be able to produce reliable information. And so being able to, explain that within a report or say we're moving towards that is key to really mitigating the risk of coming out with a report that just has a lot of information but not a lot of substance to that information, or not a lot of good metrics related to that. So I think what we've seen is companies within this reporting life cycle it's something that definitely takes time, but moving towards that and really engaging with their stakeholders to figure out what those key performance indicators are, and then developing those reporting systems, which the best practice being integrating those within their own financial reporting systems, is something that's going to take time, but it's something that I'm definitely seeing, out in the marketplace, a lot of companies knowing that this is the right way to go about it.
I think for us, it's slow goings. We started last year, and I think you certainly learn a lot when you publish your first report. One of the things that we learned was that we have great data on some areas and in some places, and in other places we know that our business units in Europe and in Asia are doing, I'll use the community sort of work as an example, great things. We don't necessarily all have it in one place, and so part of what it forced us to do was take a look internally and say, okay, what systems do we need to be able to capture it? We recognize that as we move to communicating and talking to external audiences, they may not want to know every data point and every statistic about everything. And so part of it is figuring out, what's important, what's material to our business, what do we think when we've talked to external groups, what is it that they're interested in? I think for us as well, moving beyond just sort of putting everything into a publication and using our internet site and sort of the website as another vehicle to sort of include other data, so that, I recognize that I read a lot of these reports, and we probably all do, but not everybody does. People want to see what they want to see, and so how do you make it sort of user-friendly but strike the right balance so that it is data-intensive, but not too overwhelming or not too underwhelming, for that matter. So.
As I mentioned in the beginning, we are going through a process right now to identify and publish our key performance indicators in our next report. And I think that the way, the process that we undertook to try to identify those, sometimes I think you get in a company, I don't know if other companies are like this, but we think we know what everybody wants to know. And sometimes that's the case. People want to know about our food, they want to know about our menu choices, and we know that. But we undertook a process when we were identifying these key performance indicators to see what is it that stakeholders want to know. Identified our stakeholders, did the research around that. We did a kind of companion research to that, which is what are other companies measuring? How do we stack up amongst our, inter-industry? unlike at UTC, we don't have great data collection systems. I mean, McDonald's is very decentralized, and so there's not a lot of things that get reported up to our corporate headquarters. And oftentimes, like in Europe, if we're talking about health and safety data, for example, each country really has to measure it differently, so it's not easy to roll up. So we're having a lot of challenges when we're actually trying to get this data. But to the point, the question that you'd asked, Lisa, I think these key performance indicators, they go a long way in towards making a report a meaningful tool and not just PR. As I was thinking about that question, though, I think it was the person from Stonyfield was talking about how they use marketing as an opportunity to educate. And, there's this big divide we talk about between PR and corporate responsibility communication, and I think that's what sometimes makes it so unattractive, is that you have these like really thick reports that people don't want to read, and it's hard sometimes to boil down into a sound bite, and not that I'm advocating for that, but I think it's maybe it can be a meaningful tool. Maybe PR and around corporate responsibility communication can be meaningful. Maybe that's how you reach more people. But I think that it has to be substantive, it has to be open, it has to be honest, and it has to be real. When I think about PR now, and most that I see, it's kind of these, what are you actually trying to tell me by your product, or, whatever it is. But I think there's an opportunity for a kind of deeper message there. And some companies obviously now are doing that, but I know that's not what this panel's on.
So I think, for the Coca-Cola company, because we're so global as well and are in 200 countries, that, as Kyle says, part of the challenge is really making this report meaningful for all of our internal folks as well as all of their stakeholders. And I think it's a lot of stakeholder engagement. It's a lot of really, for us internally, even trying to understand what all of the internal needs are for reports like this. What we decide to include are kind of those core things like, corporate governance. I mean, very simply, what the composition of our board, how are our board directors selected? I mean, things that everyone internally should really understand about the company, even as far as political contributions and kind of what's permissible and what isn't. I mean, it should be a reference tool. It should internally kind of be like your internal reference tool that you can go to, and that's how employees are telling us they use it, because we actually do employee surveys, and we also do surveys online, and about 75% of the people who even view our annual report and citizenship report online are students, and they actually fill out surveys quite well. But the things that we do include,
That's right.
The things that we do include in the report, and in particular in this year's report, we thought it was important to draw attention to those issues where we see ourselves able to really significantly impact and make a difference because we're uniquely able to do that, like HIV/AIDS, because we're the largest employer in Africa, because we've got this distribution system which allows us to have things like a Love Life caravan that takes education and condoms throughout all of West Africa, impacting 50 million people. I mean, we can do that because of our distribution system. And so water projects that we are really focused on, partnerships with the World Wildlife Fund. I mean, those are the things we want to really focus on in reports like this. Those big issues where we as a hydration company, obviously water is important and key to our business. So, we want to make sure that we're giving examples of the things that we're doing, not only for the stakeholders to understand kind of the importance of these issues, but internally so we all understand how these impact our business, and that these programs and initiatives, if we think about how we can transfer knowledge about things that we know about because of the business we're in, we can really make a difference. So we try to make sure that we report on those things.
So just one follow-up question, and then I'm turning it over to Y'all, two of you mentioned engaging stakeholders in developing your KPIs. Can you just be a little bit more specific about how exactly do you engage stakeholders? What kind of processes do you use? And maybe Brad can tell us how common that is in these reports.
Do you want to know about engaging stakeholders around finding out about KPIs, or
Yes.
just stakeholder engagement in general?
To decide on what to
KPIs.
measure.
I guess I'll go first. I mean, in terms, I talked about the process a bit. I didn't go ahead and define the stakeholders, but we I think do stakeholder engagement in a variety of ways, and did quite a bit of stakeholder engagement around this last report, which is where the need for KPIs came out. Specifically, what that was, we have a lot of we're a member of BSR and sustainability and the Natural Step, and so after this report, we all got together and had some kind of expert insight and feedback on the report. In addition, we have a kind of survey and reached out and just talk as much as we can generally to find out feedback. When we went through the more structured process of the report, we worked with sustainability, was our partner in it, to work to identify all of the key stakeholders that we had. And it would be, just to government and our employees and customers and the CSR expert community, and I think we had about 15. But a lot of what we did was desk research to find out, what do they care about? What kind of issues do they want to know about us, specifically from McDonald's? Because we hear that in a variety of ways a lot. And then I think looked at that versus our internal capabilities. If they really want to know about farming practices for beef, that what that says to us, we can't really write a whole report on that because that's not what McDonald's does. McDonald's sells food, so we can talk about our suppliers and our link to the supply chain, but it highlights for us how we have to kind of structure our report. So anyways, I guess that's a bit about our KPI process. Who else?
And for us, as far as even our environmental report, we actually have an environmental advisory board. They are part of the process of helping us determine those important key things that we need to be sure to touch on. They critique our reports as well, and they're from there's 7 of them, and they're from 7 different countries, and so it's kind of nice because you get very different cultural insight. But we also have water forums. We have, when we have different environmental meetings within the company, the report is actually a main topic of discussion, making sure that we're kind of meeting the expectations, I would even say internally, of what we should be reporting on is part of the performance. And believe me, coming up with those targets and goals, the consensus around those for a global system, we've got 300 bottling partners around the world, and we all come together to compile our environmental data to talk about our water impact and waste, solid waste, and recycling. So it is quite an undertaking to get consensus on what those targets and goals are. And those are just active working meetings where everyone is just rolling their sleeves up and locking themselves in a room for days.
If I can just add one thing, we're actively engaged right now in the process both of mapping our internal stakeholders and our external stakeholders. And so I flew from the East Coast yesterday and spent quite a bit of time on my laptop developing a bit of this map. And so it's been a really interesting process, particularly for us, because oftentimes when you look at our supply chain or you look at some of our business partners, we're in partnerships with and relationships with our customers in a variety of different ways. And so that's been a really interesting part of the process. And I think what we hope to do in this year's report is sort of bring out some of these stakeholder voices and actually be able to infuse their insights into the way that we're looking at the issues that are material and are important to our business.
Yeah, in terms of frequency, first, just to make sure that everybody's on the same page, in terms of stakeholder definition, we basically consider anybody that is impacted by or impacts an organization. So, when you think about it, that can be pretty much every one of us is a stakeholder then for these three companies that are up here, if you think of it that way. So when you kind of start with that huge universe, really figuring out, okay, well, we've got this huge group, but let's really be a little bit more strategic about which stakeholders we engage and which are the right ones to really look at and focus at and do the mapping of internal and external stakeholders to really narrow it down and then go through the stakeholder engagement process. And I opened up my survey just to make sure I got the right numbers, and because I forget sometimes. So we found that in terms of just mentioning key stakeholders in the 250 reports that we looked at, a little over half of them mentioned that they looked at the stakeholders and just addressed them to some extent. But when it came down to really having a structured stakeholder dialogue or engagement, which is really what's, again, kind of the leading practice in reporting, that was only about a third of the companies did that. When you get down to a little bit more information about really looking at stakeholder identification and how a company figures out who their key stakeholders are, that's only 7%. So you can see that there's still a lot of room for improvement, even within these companies that are really leading edge companies on reporting, to really go through that process. And it's something that, again, takes time, but to make sure it's a meaningful report by having that stakeholder engagement and dialogue.
Thank you. Okay, so now I'd like to open it up to the group, and I'll call on you, and I'll try to repeat your question so that we get it on tape. So the question is about examples of specific metrics that were hard to come by that you think are really critical to your CSR reporting.
I can touch on just the beginning part of your question, because we are still in the process of identifying our KPIs. So I think that I'm hoping that some of those aha moments will come, but haven't yet. And the most difficult, frustrating metric that we've come across is how to measure our balanced lifestyles is what we term kind of our menu choice, and how we're providing information to our customers about our menu and what's on our menu and the nutritional information around that. So it's a key priority for our company right now, and we don't really know how to measure that. I mean, we know lots of ways we can measure it, but how do we measure it that's meaningful? So, for instance, we've talked about, do you measure in the number of menu choices? And if we have 5,000 menu choices or 150 or whatever, does that mean anything? Is a big number good? Is a small number bad? We've looked at scientific things like energy density and nutrient density, and then comparing our menu with the recommended daily kind of allowances in categories. And there's a reason to do everything, and there's a reason not to do everything. So we're actually just at a point now where we're going to take this challenge that we face, because I'm not a nutritional expert, to our Global Advisory Council. And this council is made up of expert nutritionists who McDonald's works with to help us develop our menu. As you know, we just came out with our nutritional information labeling initiative maybe 3 weeks ago, and we worked with them on things like that. So we're reaching out to the external community. We're having a really hard time with some of these metrics, because how do you measure? No company that I've seen in my benchmarking research has actually tried to measure this area. So it's a challenge, I guess, is why I answer your question. It's a challenge that we're facing, and hopefully in 2006 you'll see that we've answered it.
I can say one other thing about that. From a metric perspective, all of UTC's environmental goals were always normalized by revenue. And so if you look at all of our environmental metrics, you always see that sort of in parentheses. And so we've heard from several environmental groups that that's nice, but we want to get to the heart of it. And so it's been a very interesting process internally, because our current set of environment, health, and safety goals are sunsetting next year, and so they're just in the process. And we've been working to develop the next set of goals, and to set big goals and to figure out how we're going to achieve them. And one of the things we've been grappling with is, okay, how do we move from, because it's part of the systems are set up that way, how do we move from that into redefining the goals and collecting the data? And so it's been a really interesting discussion, but internally we've all made a commitment that we're sure some people we can continue to do that, but we're also going to report the goals not normalized by revenue, so that people can actually see the real percentages. And so that'll be a change for us, and it's been an interesting discussion internally to get there.
So in developing your performance indicators, has that ever led to changes in the process of how you do business?
Well, and specifically, I know you said looking at what your competitors are doing, and that always influences, especially, a consumer product company. We pay attention to what everyone's doing. I mean, we pay attention to what McDonald's is doing. Trust me, as soon as their report came out, it was on my desk, and Kyle and I didn't plan that, but don't you love this red? But as one of our long-time partners, McDonald's, I mean, not only do we care that we're kind of all running together, especially our partners, but that we're all kind of talking about the same things, and that, not necessarily in the same way, but if the goal of this reporting is for transparency, so that not only you understand what the companies are doing, but you can compare companies and their performance and practices within all of these various arenas, then you have to pay a lot of attention to what your competitors are reporting on, what trends are important. They may know something you don't know about, what's important to stakeholders and consumers and all of those good things.
I think just part of that question, the process of identifying the KPIs has been great for us. I mean, as challenging as it is, to have discussions around each of these pieces has really, I can't say that at this point that it's created change, but I think it very well may be able to. Because you're having discussions, you're getting lots of different kinds of people from different departments. It's a very cross-functional process around the table and looking at things in a way that you haven't before. To step back a little bit, and to Angela's point, one of the things, just even identifying and reporting on our KPIs, when we saw Starbucks report that they just came out with, they've got a great one-page kind of synopsis of their KPIs, which was really, every meeting that I go to identify these KPIs, I take the Starbucks report with me, and I say, this is what Starbucks did, and we'd really like to try to do something similar in our next report. So it's a great motivator. That's just the kind of overall, it's not getting into specifics too much, but I think, as with many things, and I was in a Patagonia discussion earlier this morning, and it seems like, and they were saying also, that it's not getting to the end that counts, it's about the process, and I think that's totally true, what I found thus far with identifying our KPIs.
So have there been any steps taken to create standards so that you can compare the reports across companies?
There have been a few. The largest was called the Global Reporting Initiative. It was actually started out of the U.S., out of Sirius in Boston, but it's now based out of Europe. And what they've come up with is just a listing of, they've come up with a few. They've come up with 2 sets of standards. They're about to roll out with the 3rd generation of standards next year, but really try to get some uniformity about what to report. And it's the most frequently cited reference tool for how companies to report. I know Angela mentioned that for the environmental report, I believe, it's based on GRI. We found in our survey it was about 40% of all the companies that produce reports reference that. And there's been a continuing trend to that. With G3, which is going to come out again next year, what they've done is try to address some of the issues that have been with what's right now in the Global Reporting Initiative indicators, which is a huge number of indicators that are out there. Not a lot of practical application about how to actually apply them, how to report on them, and not a lot of industry-specific guidance. And so they're coming out, hopefully, with what's going to be a lot more detail-oriented and a lot more specific about how to really focus on these few key areas for a company to hopefully increase that comparability with their G3 initiative. But that'll be something to wait and see. Other than that, it's another organization based out of the UK called Accountability that came out with a standard of how to actually go about reporting information, and that's kind of number 2 in terms of what companies are following about going about the reporting process.
So do you see this CSR function as being primarily accounting, marketing, or strategy setting for your organization?
I think there is a certain amount of, with anything that you produce and publish, anything that you release externally, there is the perception that it's got some marketing aspect to it. I don't think that we go into, in particular, our environment or our citizenship report with the marketing mind on. I think that what helps us is that it really helps us solidify what our beliefs are, what's important to us as a company, what we should focus on, what our target should be, and hopefully through putting it down in a book that everyone kind of has to sign off on and commit to, that it makes it more real and it makes those goals achievable. So it's almost like it's helping us set our own internal strategy about how we're going to really make corporate responsibility come to life, and always keep it in mind when we're making business decisions. And of course, I think it gives us the ability to tell you things about the company which will impact your decision on whether or not you want to drink Dasani or Coke or whatever it is. So that's a good thing. Everybody should have all of the information, whether it's financial or social, about the companies that you're supporting and patronizing. So yeah.
I think for McDonald's, if you look at the first report, as I mentioned, I don't know if it has anything in there that is equatable to a challenge. It's definitely a little bit more on the kind of marketing side. Not that it was used as a marketing tool, but I don't know how much of a kind of candid, open, honest report that it was. So I think we're moving towards that closer. Even in the last report, I think we made steps towards that, but it still has the glossy photos and it's got this really attractive cover, and but I think we were more open with some of the things that we're facing, and looking to do that even more with the next report. I think one of the problems with a corporate responsibility report is the moment that it's published, it's pretty much a historical document. I mean, it's about kind of a snapshot in time. It talks about some of the things that are going on in the future for sure, but I think it's focused more about kind of, one of the key objectives in our report is to talk about progress. Where have we come since our last report? So in essence, that makes it a bit of a historical document. But I think the process, to Angela's point, helps to really set the strategy internally. Whether it's identifying KPIs or just gathering the information, meeting to write the report, it creates a lot of great kind of discussion and strategizing around the process and where do we want to go with this. So similar to the KPIs, the report, I think the process is definitely the best value of it. Don't know if that answers your question, but...
I think it's interesting for us because obviously we're not really in the consumer business, so we're in B2B, and we're not a big marketing company. So for us putting the report together, absolutely, it was certainly an effort to sort of bring all of these elements together in one place and publish a document that could help internally be able to talk about the issues. But similarly, I think as we sort of pulled it together, it's helped us really think through, okay, where do we go next? And so it's definitely moved into much more of a strategic function. And I think as you look across our businesses, people are referencing it and looking at sort of it as sort of the values of the company. UTC has 5 commitments, and one of the commitments of our company is social responsibility. And so it's helped to sort of drive that again through the business, but also, reinforce the strategy that this is something we should all be doing, and how do we all make it work.
Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I was just going to add one last comment. Just from an accounting firm, I have to say it has to be an accounting perspective. But no, I think it really depends in a lot of ways by country as well as to where it kind of falls in. I worked for a while for KPMG's South Africa practice, and in there it was very much an initiative of to be a company there and to have a license to operate, you need to report on these social issues. So from that perspective, it was, just to really sell in the marketplace, you needed to start looking at this. And so they had some interesting initiatives to really get consumer awareness around this and also to drive decision purchases. In the U.S., where we've kind of looked at it from is from tying it with corporate governance. And so looking at it from that financial perspective, and that's what's resonated best when we've gone in and spoken with this about CFOs, and where they've said, okay, this starts to make sense. And it starts to make sense for us to measure this in a similar way to how we're reporting other information. And also to look at from a perspective of, how does Sarbanes-Oxley impact reporting? It has a big impact on this. And so when you kind of look at it from that perspective in the U.S., I think is where it really drives this as, okay, it makes sense for this to be an accounting function within the U.S. But I think it does vary a little bit.
So we'd like to hear about your opinions on and the implications for U.S. companies of possibly a European trend to make CSR reporting mandatory or to regulate.
I can start with that one. I mean, I know in the UK, for instance, they have mandatory non-financial reporting. And, it's even in Brad's statistics that he's talked about, consistently the U.S. tends to be lower on the ladder of companies that are reporting around these issues. Obviously we're all doing reports, so a mandatory reporting wouldn't affect us necessarily. I guess it depends on how it would be enforced, but I think that what I like about how it is now is there's so much flexibility around it, in the sense that, as I said, a report only has legs that go so far. So, I like the flexibility now that if McDonald's decided they just wanted to have the information on the website and then put out a different kind of communication piece in our restaurants in a brochure form or whatever it would be, that would be allowed and not, illegal, I guess. And then you see other companies too trending towards information in their annual report. I don't know if that would be not allowed in that kind of a mandatory non-financial reporting. But I guess I think that there are benefits in having the flexibility there for companies who are really kind of laggards in this area. I think that maybe there would be a benefit in having some kind of a standard or a requirement around that.
So from Finland, the question is about what metrics might investors be most interested in addition to the financial metrics that they receive,
and how these can add to the evaluation of the company,
and how this can add to the evaluation of the company.
And I can speak to that a little bit because I think when we're putting these reports together, we always have a mind to the business and kind of the business implications, making sure that people don't think that we're only producing the report for the sake of producing it, but that it has a place in the business. I mean, corporate responsibility has a place in the business. And, just one example of non-financial data that could make a difference for investors is, last year in 2004, system-wide, we reduced our water usage by 6%, which is impressive. And next year we, hopefully will improve upon that, our solid waste reduction level. All of these things mean that we're doing business more efficiently. So obviously these have direct business implications as well. So, these reports enable us to also tie things back directly for investors. And, they're the socially responsible investor communities. There are plenty of people who make decisions based on things that aren't necessarily that tied specifically to profitability and efficiency, but make decisions based on a company's practice and behavior.
Benefit of integrating the CSR reporting into the annual report?
I think that if you have a report that is only talking about the financial performance of a company, just as Al Gore was saying, that's not a complete picture. And I would say that at Coca-Cola we really do believe that there has to be this holistic view of the business, and that includes the planet, and that includes people, and that includes partners, and that includes all of these things. Does that mean we shouldn't report specifically on corporate responsibility in a separate document or a separate section of our website? I don't know. I don't know if there'll ever be this complete morphing and we'll have only one report. I would say that probably for the next couple of years, it makes sense for people to be able to look at kind of the corporate behavior, corporately responsible behavior, socially responsible behavior of companies separately. And whether it's in a document or a section on our website, I think people need to be able to find that information, drill down and get as much detail as they can, and that's really important to stakeholders.
For everyone, how do you deal with potential legacy liabilities when you report? You have stumped them.
Meaning, you mean just being responsible for whatever is contained within the report, or?
More like managing the information. Like, for example, you don't want, let's say, for example, you would move and McDonald's, for example, you would move towards just using all organic ingredients, which would be a good thing. But then at the same time, you would kind of put a flag, before we weren't just using all organic ingredients. So as our knowledge grows, there is new technology, and I think that goes for that's across industry sectors. So you're getting better, but at the same time, it's kind of raising sometimes a flag on some issues that we inherited from the past.
Yeah.
But I think as technology, as we create sort of the next generation of products, I mean, if you talk to the person who runs UTC's research center, he would say that his goal is to create cleaner, quieter, more efficient products. And so as you move forward and you try to meet those goals, hopefully technology helps you improve upon sort of your past legacy as well. And so I think for us, it's certainly talking about where we've come from, but also talking about where we're going, because I think there's a lot of potential moving forward. So at least for us, I don't hesitate about saying that's where we're going, and that's what we see the future.
I also think that at McDonald's, and I think that you talked about this too, Angela, we feel like we've always we've been doing a report for 4 years, but we've always operated with a mindset to what's responsible. So I don't think that there's necessarily if we were making a decision that we've then changed, I think that we'll have very good reason for why we initially made that decision and why we're making a different decision now. So as long as I think we effectively are honest and open and tell that story, that goes a long way towards people understanding how and that's what we're trying to encourage for companies to grow and evolve and get better. So I think that I haven't seen a lot of backlash from doing that I know of.
So how do you measure the success of the CSR report in and of itself?
I think that's a really difficult thing to do, and a difficult potential kind of trap to get into. I mean, if the companies who are doing these reports are, if the employee satisfaction hasn't changed, is that going to be a deterrent for doing a report in the future? We would never want that to be the case. But I don't know if anybody.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's definitely tough to really do, and it just to be clear, it's 64% are reporting versus not reporting.
US.
Oh, right, in the U.S., yeah, that's correct. And so, so it's, I think what companies have tried to do is, one of the things I mentioned before about Sony is one thing they did in their report is provide a user feedback form to say, hey, what else would you like information on, or how would you evaluate our report? And in their 2004 report, I think some of y'all do this as well, which is kind of the best practice of doing it. But they put, we had this in our report, and we sent out tons of these, and they said of our 8 responses we got back, 4 were, related to the color of the report or something like that. So it was something that, and so when you're talking about that, and then you're like, okay, what is the success of a successful report? That's not going to be the measure that's probably going to work. But what the measures that can work are are you improving your employee turnover, and is this a factor in this? Are you being listed on more SRI funds, and is this a factor in this? Have you enhanced your market share because you've got a higher reputation and a better reputation on different charts? And is this a factor in contributing to that? And so it's not that I don't think there's any one item that does it, but I think it's collectively looking at these different things and saying, is this all contributing to this improvement within our company? And it's hard to do that direct link, but I think it's pretty easy to do that indirect link.
The future of reporting and how far down the supply chain should the reporting go?
I can mention a little bit about the future of reporting just in terms of what we're seeing. Again, it's kind of an increased number of reporting and increased integration with the annual reports, although I have talked to several people that they want to definitely keep it distinct and they don't want to integrate that, and that's purposely done, and they don't think they eventually will. I think one of the more interesting things in this field is going to be, all right, what's the trend going to be in getting external assurance of these reports and really judging, we've got companies reporting on their emissions or other factors, but what's the value of that data unless you maybe have an independent evaluation of it, and figure out who could do that, who should do that, and how much is that going to cost. It's not a cheap process to do that. And also, what should that really look at? And that's probably the biggest challenge in the future of reporting is if these are going to be meaningful reports, I think there's going to start to be some demanding, and there already has been, of really getting some external objective feedback on these reports and whether you can really trust the numbers. So I think that is really going to be one of the biggest trends is that I think definitely reporting is going to continue. It's only going to increase from here on out, and then maybe figuring out, again, verification or assurance on those reports is going to be the next biggest challenge.
And for the consumer products companies, what are you doing to help consumers make choices with your reports?
Are you talking about products or reports?
Well, so when talking about the reports you guys supply, you guys have your one way of measuring it, and it's not necessarily comparable to, say, Pepsi and the way they measure success. And you can't say how much water you consume is actually good, even though you may have reduced to 6% if they're already using 20% less water. There's no comparable because you guys aren't supplying the information in an absolute manner. So I guess what are you guys doing to help us if I want to choose one product or another based on the quality of your CSR? How are you guys progressing that?
Well, we do actually report the information in actual, billions of liters also, water usage, energy usage, and megajoules. I mean, in whole numbers, not just the fraction that has been reduced or increased for usage. So in that way, hopefully we're all using the same standards of measurements, and if not, that's something that's easy to convert to. So we do make sure that we at least provide you with the raw numbers as well as the percentage of increase year to year for energy, for all of those kinds of things. So hopefully people can really compare across companies. One thing even in our environmental report that we did was we provided conversion of kind of most of the common units of measurement, just in case you've got a report side by side that's not using megajoules, for example. You know kind of what that means. So I think that is important, and I think that, sure, it's kind of an empty thing to say, oh, yeah, it was less 2%, and oh, yeah, it was plus 4. I mean, so.
Just a little clarifying, I guess more what you're curious about is what cooperative actions are you taking with your competitors in supplying this type of information?
And, I can't say that we work within the beverage industry to think about reporting and how we should report as a beverage, as an industry as a whole. That's not something that we've done yet. And I don't know about...
I think your question is assuming that customers want to know, which unfortunately is not what we see. You've also touched on a really interesting area for McDonald's, which is that within our industry, which is the quick service restaurant industry, there are competitors reporting on this. I mean, Starbucks is kind of the closest competitor that we talk about who's reporting on this. Now, I know a couple weeks ago Wendy's released a report, but I wouldn't necessarily call it a report. So they didn't really have any data. So
Heard it here first.
So I guess we're kind of setting the industry standards, but we haven't seen other QSRs necessarily following. And not only that, we perception. We have this information out there. We have this nutritional labeling initiative that's now been announced a couple weeks ago. We've got this report that's public, which is much more than any of our competitors. Yet public perception is that Wendy's is a more responsible company than McDonald's. So I don't even know if we had it. I mean, I don't know. It's quite a complicated thing that you touch on, but okay. I don't know. Yeah.
So just to conclude, please just share with us one or two sentences in conclusion.
Yeah, first, thanks for attending. I hope you found this informative. The one thing I would say, too, is I was at Net Impact Conference 3 years ago as an MBA student, and everybody's thinking about jobs. And this is a place for jobs. In this market, especially in the U.S., there's some good opportunities. You can tell that Wendy's needs help. You can pledge them. There's some really good opportunities. And so if you're interested in this, it's actually a field where you can do sustainability work and find a job in it. So.
Thanks very much. It's been a pleasure to be here. Similarly, I mean, I think as you look at what sort of jobs you're going to pursue, it doesn't necessarily just have to be in quote-unquote CR. I think there are lots of different areas in a business function that touch on it, from supply management. I think our friend who asked the question about supply management left, but to supply management, to environment, health, and safety management, a variety of places. So think about that as well, that, corporations in different places are touching all these issues, and it's not just the people who necessarily have the titles with corporate responsibility that are doing it. So.
Yeah, definitely echo everything that's been said. Thank you very much. It's been great to be here. Today is my first time in Net Impact Conference. It's been wonderful. But I think, just in terms of reporting in McDonald's, stay tuned. I think we're at a really interesting point in where we're at in reporting and how we're thinking about reporting internally. And I think what you're going to be seeing in the future is going to be exciting and different, and hopefully breaking ground and leading the industry. But yeah, so stay tuned and let us know what you think, too.
And I have to say that, a lot of my friends are kind of surprised that I'm at the Coca-Cola Company, corporate America, and I'm not doing some nonprofit work somewhere and helping to save the world. And I say that you can do that within corporate America as well. You can impact real people. You can work within corporate America and benefit communities and help them find solutions to problems, and you can do that all with the corporation standing behind you. So, as you think about how you want to impact this community or those around the world, keep in mind that, you can do that in corporate America too.
Well, I found this to be a very informative panel. I hope you all have as well, and I'd like to give a round of applause to our panelists. Thank you.